One of the things I really enjoy as a priest is my little part that I play in the marriage prep process. And in particular, I like to go through the assessment, which is called Prepare and Enrich. So the couple takes this separately, online assessment, and computer does what a computer does and, formulates things, and then it spits the results to me, and I go through this assessment with them. And it goes through things like family life and friends and communication skills and financial outlook and all these things. And in one of the early set of questions, it asks about idealistic distortion. So we're trying to get sort of a view of whether these people view reality or if they sort of gloss over issues because they just think that everything needs to be perfect. And one of the questions in that section is, or it's actually a statement, you're supposed to respond a particular way. The statement is, I love everything I've learned about my partner. And the options are strongly agree, undecided, which I always take as the wrong answer that they don't want to say, disagree, or strongly disagree. Now, they want you to disagree with this. And, some people just aren't really bothered by things, but I think most people should answer disagree. And I thought of a few examples of this. If someone would answer strongly agree just for the sake of wanting to look like they have it all together, right? And they're the best couple that's ever existed on the face of the earth. So, when I learned about his smelly feet, yes, I just was excited to learn about that. And it made me fall even more in love with him. I learned that she cries for no apparent reason. And that just warmed my heart. I loved that about her. I learned that he leaves dishes in the sink. Probably don't love that. This is something that some friends of mine were talking about a couple weeks ago, last weekend. I learned that she sheds hair everywhere. I love walking into the bathroom and brushing my teeth and seeing hair all over the place. It just really helps me to grow in my love for this person. Now, someone could say that they love these things, and they could be, speaking realistically, all right, yeah, whatever. It's kind of cute and whatever I like. Even the quirks about this person make me love them more. Okay, whatever. Fine. Probably good that I'm a priest. But we could also be a little bit more realistic and say, okay, those things are kind of nasty and annoying, but I love the person anyway. And so to not sort of put on these rose-colored glasses that eventually will fall away, and then we'll just be annoyed at everything the person does, even the things that aren't really annoying, because we just put ourselves in a bad position. Now, if we're honest, I think that many of the truths of the faith sort of fall into this category. That we're tempted, and we feel like we ought to say, oh yeah, that is great, and I love that. But it's not really true at first approach. Right? And even the disciples express this at the Bread of Life discourse. Right? When Jesus turns, or when he gives the Bread of Life discourse, some of them speak up and say, this teaching is hard. Who can accept this? And so they're being confronted with something that is difficult. And they're recognizing it, which is a good thing. They're not just simply glossing over it. And maybe we have the same reaction to some of the things that the church talks about. Maybe when we first hear the precept of the church that we're supposed to give for the financial concerns of the church, maybe we say, oh yeah, that's wonderful, and I'm just going to give freely, and it's going to be great. Or maybe we question it. Why in the world does the church need my money? Why do they want me to give? Maybe when we hear about the demand, the precept that we go to Mass every year, or every week, not every year, every week, we go to confession every year. Well, why do I need to do that, right? I can pray in my house. I can kneel by my bed in the morning and confess my sins to God. Maybe when we're confronted with the church's teaching on sexuality and family planning, maybe we say, oh yeah, that's beautiful, and the church knows exactly what she's talking about, and this is just so awesome. Or maybe we struggle with it and say, what in the world does this have to do with anything? Maybe we see these as difficult, and we need to admit that if we do. Right? Because following God has always been difficult to a certain degree. And we see this in the readings for today. In the first reading, we hear from the prophet Ezekiel. And I say this all the time, right? That the prophets aren't sent by God to people to say, hey, I just wanted to come and encourage you because you're doing such a great job. When the prophets are sent, they're sent to the people because they're going astray from God. And they're there to point out the faults and to call them back into relationship with Him. And so the prophets generally are not welcomed as these wonderful, people that everyone loves to see. Right? We hear about this in the first reading from Ezekiel, that he is sent to a people who are straying, right? I'm sending you to a people who are not going to want to listen to what it is that you have to say. The same thing in the gospel, right? Jesus himself teaches in the synagogue, and at first, when they're hearing it, they're astonished because he speaks in a way that's different than the other people who have spoken in the synagogue. He speaks as one with authority, and they're kind of amazed with it at first, but it doesn't take very long for them to realize that what he's saying is challenging, and they become offended at what he's saying, right? They take offense at him, it says. And so they throw him aside, and he's unable to perform mighty deeds because of their lack of faith. Now, I say all of this as a very long introduction. Don't worry, the body of it's not too long. But as an introduction to looking at the second reading. Because I think it can be tempting for us, it's tempting for me, to read this second reading and just sort of read it piously. And say, oh, well, Paul knows exactly what he's talking about. And this is the most beautiful thing I've ever heard in my entire life. And it's just so wonderful. And I can't wait to enter into it. Now, maybe if I was holier, that's how I would approach it, but that's not how I approach it. And so I'll give you the unfiltered Father Broussard approach to this reading with three things that I picked out. The first quote, that I, Paul, might not become too elated because of the abundance of the revelations, a thorn in the flesh was given to me, an angel of Satan to beat me, to keep me from being too elated. I don't know about you, but I didn't wake up this morning saying, man, I am just so grateful that God gives me these little thorns in the flesh to keep me from being too elated. I don't say that. Right? To say that, for me, maybe not for you. Maybe you're holier than me and you're just at that level. And if you are, pray for me. But maybe we approach it that way, and if I would approach it that way, that would be an idealistic distortion. Right? Oh, everything's great, Lord. I love that reading. I love that you give me this thorn in the flesh to keep me from being too elated, that you send an angel of Satan to beat me. Thank you, Lord. This is amazing. Right? And we can ask ourselves questions that sometimes we're afraid to sort of let bubble up in our minds. We push them aside real quick because we don't feel like it's right to have these thoughts. But this is the unfiltered version. So here's one of those thoughts. Doesn't it just seem like God is on a power trip? Like, what's wrong with me being too elated? What's wrong with me doing... it's because of the abundance of revelations that God is sending these things. So he's going to send me revelations, but then he's going to maybe sort of pick on me by sending an angel of Satan to beat me so I don't become too elated because of the revelations he gave me. Okay. Is it just that he doesn't want me to succeed? That he just kind of wants to hold me down and keep me from being too good? The ultimate question that I have is this really necessary? Can we go about it some other way? Couldn't you just send me some not too elated? Do I really have to be beat down to not become too exalted? The second little portion that I honed in on is this. My grace is sufficient for you, for power is made perfect in weakness. Again, this is a beautiful line, and probably everyone in here knows that line. We maybe can't say where it's from. We know the Bible, but maybe not the book and the verse and all that stuff. And at first we're tempted to say, and we want to say, well, that is really beautiful. But do I really believe it? Do I really believe it? It doesn't seem this way when things are really bad. Right? Maybe when we're stuck in sin, or when prayer is just awful and we feel like we're not doing anything. To read that line, my grace is sufficient for you, is kind of annoying. Right? Everything inside of me feels terrible, and I read my grace is sufficient for you. Okay, sounds good. And then it goes on, power is made perfect in weakness. That is really nice when you're not face to face with the depths of your own helplessness. But whenever you feel like you can't do anything, to hear power is made perfect in weakness can be a great comfort. It could also be really annoying. Right? When things are bad or hard, when we realize we can't control anything, this is sort of tough to stomach. And then the third part comes from the end. I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and constraints for the sake of Christ, for when I am weak, then I am strong. Again, I'm very content with these things when I'm not experiencing them. Whenever life is great and I'm feeling wonderful and things are happening, I'm accomplishing things, to hear, I'm content with weaknesses, of course I'm content with weaknesses, because I'm not feeling particularly weak right now. Of course I'm content with insults until someone insults me. Right? These things are difficult. I don't want to be persecuted. I don't want to be insulted. I don't want to be weak. And yet, this is what Paul is saying we need to do. We need to be content with these things. So, how do we make sense of these hard teachings? Well, I kind of hesitated to actually give this homily because part of the answer is I don't know. But a bigger part of the answer is that we have to actually pray with them. The scriptures are meant to be prayed with. Jesus spoke in parables because they weren't exactly clear. He didn't just say, well, do bam, 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 bam. He gave us stories that drew us in, that forced us to ponder them. And so we need to pray with this reading. That in my weakness I am strong. And if we sit with it and we pray with it and we ponder it and we think back on our lives, it begins to make a little more sense because we can see in the past where we have felt utterly helpless and we felt like we had nothing to give, and yet somehow the Lord was able to work tremendous goods through us. More so than whenever we felt like we had everything together and we felt like we were just hitting our stride. because power is made perfect in weakness. And I thought of one example of this as I was praying this morning. We all know the story of Mother Teresa. Right? That Mother Teresa was this incredibly holy woman who lived during most of our lifetimes and who experienced the dark night for 50 years. For 50 years. Not only did she not feel consolation from God, not only did she not feel close to him, but she questioned if he even existed. That's how dark her darkness was. And yet, she was able to do incredible work. She started an entire religious order. She moved to the poorest of the poorest places in India. And she went into the streets and literally pulled people who were dying out of the gutters and brought them into homes so that they could die a dignified death. How in the world was she able to do this? I think she was able to do this not in spite of her lack of feeling God, but because of it. Because she herself experienced loneliness to a degree that probably none of us will ever experience. Because she herself experienced not feeling loved. She knew what the other people were going through, and she didn't want them to have to go through it. And so she was moved to minister to them. She could look upon the person in the street, see their suffering, and know that a lot of their suffering could be quenched by being loved. She couldn't heal them physically, but she could heal their loneliness by being with them. And so it's because of her experience of weakness that God was able to do tremendous things through her. And so I invite you to spend some time with this reading this week, to pray through it, to see those parts where you're tempted maybe to just say, okay, yeah, that's good, that's what I believe, and kind of skip over because it's hard to wrestle with, and to sit with it, and to pray through it, and to ask the Lord to show you a deeper meaning than perhaps what we think about on the surface. Because just as the Lord was able to work through St. Teresa of Calcutta, because of her weakness, he wants to work through us. We just have to recognize that weakness, be content with sitting in it, so that he can work his power through us.